let's play a game. Imagine this situation. You're interrogating a defector close to Putin, ready to tell you all his secrets. As head of the CIA, what's the first question you would ask?
Well, I'm sure that there's a pretty bulky file that the Russians have on Donald Trump prior to his presidency, during his presidency, and since then. I would love to be able to have an opportunity to review that file. Do the Russians have something on him that the Russians could use as a way to blackmail him or undermine his support in the United States?
At the beginning of 2024, Ukraine was struggling to resist the Russian army.
In 2024, we are going to take back the White House.
On the campaign trail, Donald Trump has threatened to put an end to military aid for Ukraine and to stop supporting NATO allies if he is reelected.
Now remember, the head of a country stood up and said, does that mean that if Russia attacks my country, you will not be there? That's right, that's what it means. I will not protect you.
The question is, why is he saying this? Who is suggesting these things to him? And these are the sorts of questions that the intelligence community was asking, and I'm sure continues to ask.
When he was president, what is it that he wanted to share or say to Vladimir Putin that he didn't want anybody on the American side to hear?
Answering this question would be an attempt to shed light on a labyrinthine operation of espionage and manipulation. It started 40 years ago and was put in place by the Soviets in the final years of the Cold War. At the time, Donald Trump was just a simple real estate developer. And Vladimir Putin was just a young KGB agent. There are still some gray areas in this operation, but some people have a few pieces of the puzzle.
I was in charge of the KGB intelligence operations around the world. I had several hundred people under my order. Yeah. Putin was one of my subordinates.
Was Donald Trump controlled by the KGB?
We did know something about him.
If you think it's what it's like to be a fish, you don't. The name that I'm carrying now is Jack Barsky. That's sort of an American Jewish kind of a name. But I wasn't born as Jack Barsky. They acquired a bona fide birth certificate of Jack Barsky, who had passed away at the age of 11. When I was 26, I was offered a job by the KGB as an illegal undercover agent, eventually going to the United States. In Moscow, Andropov, I was sort of trained to do espionage with regard to foreign policy. This was like the dream, the crown jewel of the KGB. Everybody wanted to be an illegal. There was a lot of, romanticism attached to it, okay? Yeah, I can understand why Putin wanted to be an illegal like me.
Like his colleagues, Putin dreamt of being part of the elite, to be infiltrated in the West into the US.
We primarily focused on acquiring the English language to a point that there was very little accent left. Apparently, Putin was considered not to be qualified. So the job that he did in Dresden was mostly bureaucratic.
Putin didn't go to the US due to his poor language skills, and instead ended up nearer to home in Dresden, in East Germany. In the KGB, he nevertheless learned its methods and its mindset. Posted to Leningrad for 4 years, he then worked under Oleg Kalugin. Kalugin was a legendary master spy. The youngest general in KGB history, he was the head of Soviet espionage in the US in the 1970s.
I'll probably sit this way if you don't mind.
Yeah, that's perfect.
In the mid-1980s, he was one of the main leaders of the KGB at a time when his country was faced with a huge challenge.
At that time, the KGB main target was the United States.
That was really an extraordinary tension.
It was the height of the Cold War. The US was rearming, supporting Afghan rebels fighting the Red Army, deploying missiles in Europe, and launching the Star Wars program. This was all driven by Republican Ronald Reagan, the most anti-communist of all American presidents.
There was nothing good about Reagan. This is a guy who is uncontrollable, reckless, and he was viewed by the Soviet leadership as a right-wing extremist. The Soviets felt that was a sort of plan to destroy the Soviet Union.
But there were some weaknesses for the Russians, which they took advantage of. Absolutely right. The illegals, that was primarily the Soviet-style operations. I would not talk about the specific events, but in the United States, we had more than 100 people, in my time.
I came to the United States with a plan to become fully established in the U.S. First, I went to college. Then I started as a computer programmer. I had to really very carefully inject myself into American society so as to not show the ignorance that I had.
Jack Barsky's mission was in line with the KGB's new doctrine that broke with previous methods. Stop working in the old way. Make a huge effort to recruit Americans. Don't just work with people with left-wing ideological sympathies. To this end, Jack Barsky infiltrated conservative think tanks close to the Reagan administration, where his mission was to get close to future leaders. In 1987, he married a woman who had no idea of his true identity, and they started a family. He was assigned a new mission. The KGB wasn't only interested in the political sphere, but also the business world, traditionally close to the center of American power.
Then there was a plan B, start a company. And the plan was to funnel money into that company with like $10 million. And the KGB knew how to do that. And at that point, money talks. I would have to learn how to play the game of golf. I was going to join the country club, and people at high levels are typically attracted to if you have a high standing in society. That's a long game, a very long game. Possible.
There's a lot of coverage of that.
Was a wealthy businessman like Donald Trump interesting for the KGB?
Oh, absolutely. Actually, when I worked in the KGB, business people were very important because they had access to technology often, and also to business relations related to financial situation.
To identify suitable profiles, the KGB provided its agents with a standard questionnaire. Are arrogance, selfishness, ambition, and vanity among the subject's character traits?
That's nice. I love you too. Thank you.
Good luck to you. This is the man, Donald Trump, the flamboyant New York real estate developer.
At the age of 39, Donald Trump has become one of America's best-known builders, presiding over a real estate empire worth more than $1 billion.
Nothing escaped Soviet intelligence.
Reports in the Wall Street Journal said Donald Trump's empire was shaky. The Trump Organization confirmed today that it is in meetings with bankers in an attempt to reorganize its vast debt. One of the issues was on the Taj Mahal, Trump's newest casino in Atlantic City.
Kenneth McCallion, a specialist in the anti-mafia fight, investigated the businessman at the time.
They had taken enough losses with his casinos in Atlantic City and other failed companies. So he was in desperate need of a different finance source.
A little bit, because it's getting a little ridiculous as far as I'm concerned.
And this was around the time that Russian oligarchs were looking to diversify their money given the instability of the country. And you had Donald Trump needing that cash.
Over the next few years, around a third of his apartments were sold to individuals with links to Russian organized crime, in particular the godfather of godfathers, the dreaded Semyon Mogilevich.
assuming that it was known to the KGB that Mr. Trump was always operating at the edge of the law. I think he may have been vulnerable. You know, we know something. If I'm sitting in Moscow and I'm looking to get one of those influential businessmen to my side, Trump was known. I mean, he also was a womanizer, and yeah, big target on his chest.
In 1987, the Soviet authorities approached Donald Trump for the first time via the daughter of the Soviet ambassador to the US.
During a diplomatic get-together, she cozied up to Trump. Personally, I don't think she had KGB agent status, that is, the operational means of the KGB. But I think the KGB were quite simply opportunistic.
Dear Mr. Trump, I have some good news from Moscow. The Soviet Agency for Tourism, Interest, has expressed interest in pursuing a joint venture to construct a hotel.
The Interest Agency, responsible for welcoming foreigners, was controlled by the KGB.
The golden rule was to find something that could connect them to the person in a positive way. Trump had the project to build a high-rise tower in Moscow. So they facilitated the purchase of land for the tower. And this is how they brought people together. However, when he was in Moscow, he was a bit reckless. He went out with a few prostitutes and indulged in certain pleasures. And of course, KGB cameras and microphones were everywhere.
Do you think it could have been compromised?
Well, I would not rule out. I would not say details, but speaking from my own experience, all foreigners, particularly from the United States and NATO countries, would be under control, or they tried to make it, controlled as much as they could.
And all this was documented. It could be used 10, 15, maybe 20 years later, if and when the person in question became important.
One thing was for certain. Barely had he returned from the USSR, and while discussions on the tower block in Moscow were still ongoing, the developer, who had never been involved in foreign politics before, made a surprise declaration.
Developer Donald Trump take an active interest in politics. The question arose after Trump ran this full-page ad in the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the Boston Globe at a cost of nearly $100,000. It said America should stop paying to defend countries that can afford to defend themselves.
In his attack, Trump targeted the heart of U.S. defense and the bane of the Soviets, NATO.
If you look at the payments that we're making to NATO, they're totally disproportionate with everybody else's, and it's ridiculous. As far as other causes that are near...
Was Donald Trump controlled by the KGB?
No, but we did know something about him.
What did you know?
Well, something which I would not talk about publicly.
Because you think it could be dangerous?
Yeah, well, no. There are some things which I do know or did know about, but I never really talked publicly about,
Donald Trump says he could negotiate a nuclear disarmament treaty with the Soviet Union.
A little wave at the press as you sail off into the sunset. Yeah.
Some people laugh and say his particular brand of bravado and hype could work only in a place like New York.
Tired of the building. Okay, come on. Okay, fine. No more.
Trump never got to build his high-rise in Moscow. And 4 years later, the Soviet Union collapsed. For the Americans, it seemed that the Cold War was over. Numerous KGB spies were arrested. Jack Barsky was unmasked.
I could have, made friends at high levels. I thank God today that this failed, because I would have become a very, very dangerous agent for the KGB.
Barsky cooperated with the FBI. In return, he was allowed to stay in the US, far away from the new Russia. In Moscow, the KGB men had already picked themselves up, determined to take revenge and to continue their Cold War against the US. In 1998, Putin, a former minor agent, was named head of the brand new intelligence service. Those who weren't hardliners, like General Kalugin, were sidelined.
I was chosen to become the chief of the Russian intelligence service. But there was some resistance. The man who took over, Putin, my former subordinate, he called me a traitor. And ever since, I had no choice but to ask for political asylum in the West.
Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin.
2 years later, in 2000, Putin entered the Kremlin. "15 years later, Putin was plotting to conquer the whole of Ukraine and thus reconstitute a part of the Soviet Empire. The Obama administration had imposed heavy sanctions on Russia since Putin's annexing Crimea in 2014. So, the former KGB agent had no choice but to weaken American support for Ukraine. In the US, attention turned to the start of the presidential campaign and a surprise candidate. The real estate developer, with no political experience, was supported by the conservative and populist right.
People are tired. They're just tired of incompetent leadership. I think what people want today
Donald Trump had not yet made any statement about his foreign policy program.
is better than most politicians, let's face it.
Sorry?
Yes, ma'am.
I'm visiting from Russia, so my question...
Putin. Good friend of Obama, Putin.
My
he
question...
likes Obama a lot. Go ahead.
If you would be elected as a president, what will be your foreign policy, especially in the relationships with my country?
One of the worst things that can happen to our country is if Russia ever gets driven to China. I believe I would get along very nicely with Putin, okay? And I said...
But Trump was still a long way from power. 7 months in from the elections, he was behind his Democratic opponent in the polls. Hillary Clinton was a fierce supporter of Ukraine and a thorn in the side of the Kremlin. Just as Donald Trump entered the campaign trail, Peter Strzok took over as head of the FBI department in charge of countering Russian espionage. The department was much smaller than in the Cold War years, as Russian spies were no longer a priority for the US.
When I entered the FBI, I was working, interestingly enough, domestic terrorism, so it was nothing at all what I ended up doing later in my career.
In May 2016, 5 months before the elections, a worrying event came to the attention of the FBI. Hackers had managed to get into the Democratic Party's computer servers. They stole emails and private messages between Hillary Clinton and members of her team. The following month, the FBI found out that one of Trump's advisors had been approached by a Russian agent.
The government of Russia had made an offer to this individual named George Papadopoulos, saying, hey, we have information that is damaging, embarrassing to Hillary Clinton, and made an offer to coordinate the release.
The FBI decided to make the hacking public.
U.S. intelligence agencies believe Russian cyber spies hacked into the computers belonging to the Democratic National Committee.
Anyway, a spokesman for the Kremlin today denied, of course.
The head of the CIA visited candidate Trump to warn him of the Russian maneuvers involving his campaign team.
I was in the Trump Tower in early June and sat down with Donald Trump and several other individuals to give them a briefing about the assessment that we had done on the extent of Russian interference in the election. Donald Trump listened to the briefing. He was very skeptical. He kept trying to, I think, redirect the focus away from Russia. He kept saying, you know, it could have been the Chinese. I think he was interested in trying to find out how we knew what we knew, which really worried me because I was very concerned about the sources that we had, whether they be technical or human sources. I quite frankly didn't trust Donald Trump.
The FBI opened an investigation aiming to identify any Americans suspected of collusion with Russian intelligence. It was run by Peter Strzok.
I was not prepared for that. I don't think anybody in the intelligence community was prepared for the type of interaction between Russian government actors, Russian agents of influence, and the people in and around the Trump campaign. In my mind, that had not existed, had not been seen during any of our lifetime.
The investigation revealed that 5 people working for one of the candidates to the presidency of the world's leading power had been having suspicious dealings with Russian secret services. These included 2 of his international advisors, his political advisor, his national security advisor, and even his campaign director, Paul Manafort. The FBI received some crucial information from the former anti-mafia prosecutor, Kenneth McCallion, who was now a lawyer. Paul Manafort had supposedly laundered money for an oligarch linked to the Russian intelligence services.
We were able to follow the money trail, so we turned our evidence over to the FBI. And third silent partner was Semyon Mogilevich.
The Russian godfather of godfathers, who was one of the first investors in Trump Tower, was suspected of having started working for Vladimir Putin. This led to an American associate of Donald Trump, Felix Sater.
His father was a fairly high-up lieutenant in the Mogilevich Russian organized crime organization. Felix Sater was working in Trump Tower, 2 floors below Trump's penthouse.
Thank you. Thank you.
Trump certainly would have known of his criminal past.
Bye, everybody.
This is perhaps the heart of what links Trump to Putin's Russia: money.
It is Felix Sater who suggests to Trump that they can build a Trump Tower in Moscow and get the approval of Vladimir Putin, which is something that Trump had been seeking for years. And Trump got all excited, and this was during the presidential campaign. So while he was running for president, Donald Trump, through Felix Sater, was secretly trying to get Putin to sign off on a deal that could make him millions and millions of dollars.
So that's a good economic and financial incentive for Trump never to say a bad thing about Vladimir Putin.
An easing of tensions and improved relations with Russia from a position of strength only is possible, absolutely possible.
In the months leading up to the election, the Russians were far from certain that they would see their candidate enter the White House. He was rocked by a huge scandal.
A shocking video of Donald Trump talking on an open microphone, bragging about sexually assaulting women.
You can do anything.
Grab him by the.
It remains to be seen whether Donald Trump's campaign will be able to recover from the video that is sending shockwaves.
I was talking to the head of Trump fundraising for the campaign, and this guy was distraught. He said, well, it's over. You know, there's no way we can win now. But WikiLeaks suddenly makes this dump that then shifts the attention back to embarrassing things about Hillary Clinton rather than Donald Trump.
Clinton's camp facing yet another embarrassing trove of hacked emails released by WikiLeaks. The CBS News battle tracker showing that 55% of voters polled think Clinton has different motives in private than in public.
The hacking carried out by Russian services 8 months earlier was now revealed by WikiLeaks, dealing a fatal blow to Hillary Clinton's campaign. In a tight-fought election, Donald Trump was elected President of the United States.
I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear.
I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear.
The office of President of the United States.
The office of President of the United States.
As Trump celebrated his victory, Putin took center stage, visiting one of his former bosses at the KGB.
Никогда не забудем того, что вы сделали и для страны, и для нас. Мы это очень хорошо помним. Для нас работа с вами – это очень хорошая школа была. К делу, к стране, к службе. Мы вам за это очень благодарны. Это все с нами идет по жизни. Всего самого хорошего. Здоровья вам и настроения.
When Russia wants to do intelligence operations well, they can do it very quietly. So the question remains then why Russia chose to do some things in a way that would very clearly be linked back to Russia.
I think the Russians wanted the Trump campaign to know that they were very interested in helping them, so that if Trump were to be elected, I think they wanted to be able to derive the benefit from that assistance.
Seeing the White House occupied by a president over whom he had control was undoubtedly an achievement for Vladimir Putin. But using the situation to his advantage would turn out to be more difficult. It was unknown territory which no KGB manual had ever charted. The president who entered the White House was unqualified and underprepared.
A very strong voice. People know
Trump had to get rid of his entourage, who were too visibly compromised by Russia.
And so I think
He wisely surrounded himself with advisors above suspicion, who embodied the traditional Republican line.
Morning, Mr. President. The intelligence community has never faced such a diversity of threats to our country.
I want to thank Ambassador John Bolton for joining us.
So he recruited John Bolton, a former advisor to Ronald Reagan.
You're going to do a fantastic job, and I appreciate you joining us.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here.
Thank you.
The allegations about Trump's collusion with Russia in the 2016 campaign made Trump kind of paranoid about allegations that he was elected only because of Russian assistance, and it made him very nervous about undertaking anything dealing with Russia.
When Trump met Putin for the first time in his life, he was clearly uncomfortable.
Nice to be with you.
The new president can make no concessions to the Russians.
Really very little happened at the lunch. Trump had raised the U.S. position in Ukraine. Annexation of Crimea was illegitimate.
Despite Trump's campaign promises, the Americans did not lift the sanctions against Russia, and in fact, increased them. Trump allowed his administration to sell hundreds of anti-tank weapons to Ukraine. The American president was further hampered, as he found himself under the threat of an investigative committee, which occupied the political scene for 2 years.
Given all those connections, is it likely that Donald Trump was fully aware and had every intent of working with Russia to help make sure that he could win the presidency at all costs?
I would rather not answer that specific question, other than just to tell you that Mr. Trump's desire to win would have him work with anyone. And one other
question. Was he directly involved in those negotiations, the Trump Tower in Moscow?
Well, the answer is yes.
Around 15 people in Trump's circle were suspected of being compromised by the Russian state.
Do you swear that the testimony that you are about to give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I swear.
The idea that an advanced, hostile foreign nation would be inserting themselves clandestinely in that process to undermine the will of the United States is terrible. There is no greater responsibility in the land. And the way we do that, the underpinning of what we are in America, the election.
As Peter Strzok prepared to testify, Putin and Trump met for the second time. political chaos in the U.S. was a major asset for the former KGB agent. Putin was certain that he could benefit from the weakening of the American president.
Sir, does the Russian government have any compromising material on President Trump or his family?
Значит, вот я слышал об этом. Якобы мы собирали компромат на господина Трампа, когда он приезжал в Москву. Больше ерунды трудно себе представить просто.
Every U.S. intelligence agency has concluded that Russia interfered in the elections. President Trump, who do you believe?
If anybody watched Peter Strzok testify over the last couple of days, and I was in Brussels watching it, it was a disgrace to the FBI, it was a disgrace to our country, and you would say that was a total witch hunt. Thank you very much.
In front of Putin, Trump attacked the FBI's head of counterintelligence. Within the committee, Trump supporters attempted to sabotage the investigation in any way they could.
As we continue our investigation, prior to his current assignment, he was a deputy assistant director in the
Mr. Strzok, when you're talking about stopping him and how terrifying it would be for him to win and how you can protect the country. No, Mr. Gowdy, it wasn't. I do not have bias. You're talking about impeachment of the president. The idea that... Hang on a second, Agent Strzok. Hang on a second.
After a 20-year-long career, Peter Strzok was fired from the FBI, accused of political bias. Unable to prove Trump's complicity with the Russians, the investigative committee did nothing more than implicate a few of his minor associates.
Yeah, so I'm extraordinarily disappointed. I understood that part of our mission in the FBI was to do that counterintelligence investigation. It looks like, for whatever reason, that was never done, or was done in a very small, looking at a couple of avenues, but never a coherent investigation. And I think that was unfortunate.
Even if he no longer had anything to fear from the FBI, Trump remained under fire from critics and under suspicion. The former KGB agent made the most of the situation. During the G20 summit in Helsinki, he insisted on meeting the American one-on-one without advisors.
Many people thought that strange things could happen during the one-on-one meeting.
Putin knew perfectly well that Trump, whose slogan was America First, could not be seen to be indebted to him for his election win.
When you deal with hard men like Putin, that's a very dangerous perception to have. So Putin played on that. I thought he saw Trump as an easy mark. And I think, in fact, that did help turn Trump against Ukraine.
Putin's obsession, more than ever, was with Ukraine. He put the idea into Trump's head that the electoral interference, which had caused him so much trouble, had come from Ukraine and not Russia. It was Ukraine who had supposedly hacked the infamous server of the Democrats. Trump wanted to believe, or at least pretended to believe, this unlikely scenario, which enabled him to brush aside the accusations of his collusion with Russia.
Why the FBI never took the server? Why haven't they taken the server? Where is the server? I want to know, where is the server and what is the server saying? With that being said, all I can do is ask the question.
He heard stories about Ukrainian interference in the 2016 election on behalf of Hillary Clinton. Trump had decided that her famous server was somewhere in Ukraine.
A short time later, a businessman of Ukrainian origin appeared, claiming that he had key information. Trump sent his personal lawyer to meet this mysterious informant.
They were so eager to try and find information that they were interacting with people like Andrei Derkach, who have been announced as agents, not suspected, but agents of the Russian government.
The man claimed that the server was indeed in Ukraine. With documents to back up his claims, he made even more explosive revelations. Enough to destroy President Trump's main opponent, Democrat Joe Biden, who was to challenge him in the elections scheduled 2 years later. Joe Biden had allegedly been corrupted by a Ukrainian company, which his son, Hunter, had formerly worked for. In the summer of 2019, Trump's lawyer informed him that Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky was hiding proof of the Biden's corruption.
When Zelensky prevailed, I did hear Putin on several occasions ridicule Zelensky, and he played on Trump's suspicions about what was going on in Ukraine. He was hearing all these theories. To me, it was all like a big bowl of spaghetti. It didn't make a lot of sense.
Had Trump been duped? Or was he knowingly doing what Putin wanted him to do? We can't know. But the fact is,
because he wanted something back from Zelensky.
Tremendous thing. You know, you could hook him up. You tell me when. How are you? Well, Mr. President, thank you very much. It's an honor. You've been my...
Well, I was at the White House when that call took place. I listened to it, as I typically listened in to Trump's conversations with foreign leaders. And I was very surprised.
Trump, congratulations on a great victory. Zelensky, you were absolutely right, Mr. President. We worked hard for this. The President, I would like you to do us a favor. There's a lot of talk about Biden's son. Whatever you can do with the Attorney General would be great. Mr. Giuliani, I will ask him to call you.
He got into essentially threatening to withhold security assistance until Zelensky provided Hillary's missing server and other information.
Thank you. Salah, thanks. Goodbye, President.
Immediately afterwards, Trump ordered the suspension of the $400 million of military aid that Congress had allocated to Ukraine. Zelensky was desperately in need of it, faced with a Russian threat, but he was powerless to do anything, since the corruption of Biden, just like the hacking affair, were Russian inventions.
Well, I don't have any indication that they had leverage over him. He never spoke about it, never indicated concern about leverage if they did have it.
The revelation of this conversation disrupted the end of Donald Trump's time in office as impeachment loomed. Putin could not help him win again in the 2020 elections. But division in the U.S. was beneficial to him as he prepared his big project.
During the last year, Trump clearly was not interested at all in helping the Ukrainians prepare and withstand continued Russian pressure, to include what ultimately resulted in the Russian invasion.
Putin considered himself strong enough to attack. A skilled manipulator, but a poor military leader. The former KGB agent hadn't foreseen the level of Ukraine's resistance, supported by the delivery of American arms. Bogged down, Vladimir Putin once again resorted to his favorite weapon.
Сердечно поздравляю, кто и сегодня проводит уникальные операции. Благодарю вас. Поздравляю. Всего хорошего.
As in the days of the Cold War, and as in 2016 and 2020, Russian intelligence hopes once again to influence the American elections.
This is the final battle. With you at my side, we will expel the warmongers from our government. We will drive out the globalists. We will cast out...
Putin is banking on Trump's return to power.
The fake news media once for all.
To get Donald Trump reelected. If you're Vladimir Putin, how much money is that worth? It's worth an extraordinary amount. What is that? What are your limits on what you're going to do? I would argue fewer than there ever have been.
In this way, Putin hopes to halt U.S. military support for Ukraine and to negotiate a possible peace deal on his own terms.
Trump's personality is an intelligence officer's dream. I mean, he is manipulatable in terms of his ego, in terms of his fascination with authoritarian figures. I think because he himself would like to have that power.
To have a president under his influence at the head of America, the enemy, is the finest operation carried out by the former minor KGB agent, launched on a headlong rush to restore an empire.